Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, it could be either. Welcome to Podcast 83, the podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. Today we have the MAC legislative staff joining us as usual. So we've got Deena, Bosworth, our Director of Government Affairs, Samantha, Gibson, Government Affairs Associate, Madeline, Fata, Government Affairs Associate. Today, our goal is to kind of give a little bit of a recap on the State of the State, which occurred on January 25th in the evening. So Deena, let's kick it off. Why don't we talk a little, let's do a brief overview. I'm sure folks are anxious to hear about what did the governor talk about on her fifth State of the State, our first State of the State really back post-COVID, because of course 2020 was purely remote. Last year, they still, I don't believe, allowed people in the chamber. So this year, they had people on the floor. It was kind of back to normal, 100%, 700 people on the House floor for the State of the State, justices leading people in. We had the whole rigmarole. So Deena, why don't you tell us, start us off here?
Well, I mean, it was a fairly lengthy speech from, traditional speeches. I mean, it went, 49 minutes?
It was like 50 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, it was quite a while. And the governor just covered, more of what she wants for the future. She did very little on, sort of what's been accomplished thus far, made a few references to it, but overall it was, how do I lower costs? And she focused on, and we can go into detail on these in a little bit, but she focused on lowering costs. She focused on some social issues. So, the repeal of the 1931 abortion ban, expanding Elliott Larson's Civil Rights Act. She talked about more money for education. She talked about mental health, some guns, some, infrastructure stuff, and, really kind of ran the gamut. Some economic development, talent development, those types of things. And I think, her caucus for sure, got a lot of, we're pretty excited to hear some of their priorities brought up.
They got a great workout in, if you think about it. I mean, the up and downs for the clapping, they got a great, great workout in.
Yeah, you could say that. So not all the members on the House floor got that much of a workout, but
no,
some of them did. Yes, for sure.
Very true. So what about, let's talk about some of those issue areas that maybe we can draw a line to that affect county government. There, I think there was a fair amount, not a ton, but there was some issue areas when you start talking economic development, mental health for sheriffs, prosecutors, corrections folks. We got infrastructure. So who wants to start? Deena, Samantha, what do you guys want? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to start.
Great.
So Steve, you mentioned, the governor did reference mental health care for prosecutors, corrections officers, sheriffs, police, really law enforcement as a whole, which we're always happy to see. Any expansion of mental health access is always wonderful. Law enforcement is, and the courts as well, are facing issues with the juvenile justice system. So while we want to cater to them and give them mental health access, we also realize that they're facing issues with the youth within those facilities. And I mean, really, when you're short-staffed in the facilities, that is going to negatively impact your mental health, whether you're a corrections officer, prosecutor, judge, whatever the case may be. That stress, that workload is obviously overwhelming. So if we could, see this administration and this legislature really tackle juvenile justice reform and get some funding going for juvenile justice facilities, we can resolve some of those staffing issues. And I think that will also positively impact the mental health people working in those facilities.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because there's such a lack of providers, right? Behavioral health providers, social workers. And if you're going to talk about expanding mental health to, expanding the access that our law enforcement community has to mental health, well, you also have to be concerned about expanding it to some of the more, vulnerable members of our state. So I hope that stretch, goes from officers and, those that are in those stressful job situations also to expanding the access for these juveniles. Cause I know that's one of our priorities and I really hope it goes down that path.
Well, and when you start talking about economic development, what's the intent of economic development, right? Growth. You want to add people, you want to add jobs. If you're adding jobs, you're going to need people to work in those jobs. So what does that end up doing? Well, put some pressure on your communities, right? If your communities are already stressed now and you're adding jobs, which are bringing in more people, which potentially could add more stress to the juvenile justice system, the correction, you just don't know what impact that's going to have, but they should really run parallel. If we're going to do economic development to increase the population and, increase the economy in Michigan, some of these other services have to run alongside of it. Am I wrong?
Yeah, that was pretty exciting. She did say that she wanted to, create a dedicated revenue source for more economic development. And I know that, we've been talking about economic development more and more here at the Michigan Association of Counties and the role that counties can play in it. So I'm excited to see what those details are, where that dedicated revenue source is going to come from. Hopefully it's not just straight out of the general fund. I don't really know. But I think you're right, Steve, 100%. If you're gonna invest in economic development, make sure you have strong communities, strong counties, strong services to support that growth. So I think we'll be reminding them of that as they go forward.
And I think we've seen counties playing more and more a role in that economic development. If you look at what's going on over in the Big Rapids, Mecosta County area, I know that county board was very involved in getting that very large battery plant to that area. So I think we're seeing counties get more and more involved in the economic development process and attraction, and which is great to see, because I think in the past we haven't always been at the table. So it's the counties are gonna know best what's going on in their communities and what they can handle. And as we look at that growth of economic development, of course, there's going to be infrastructure impact, right? So I think the governor talked a little bit about infrastructure. Madeline, you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. She discussed IIJA investments in a Michigan infrastructure office, and that office will really focus on roads, high-speed internet, clean energy, and lead-free pipes, which are all very important issues for our members. I don't know that she's gone a state of the state yet without saying fixing the damn roads. We all know that's her.
Probably was a spot on your bingo card, right?
Yep.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So it's refreshing to see that she hasn't lost momentum on that issue area. We all know it's a problem. I do kind of wish she had touched on EV, electric vehicles, taken over our fleets, and that there might be some funding gaps coming up in the near future with that. She's mentioned it previously, just not in this particular speech, but
Like funding gaps for fixing the roads, right?
yes,
Yeah, that's
yes,
what you meant.
for
Yeah.
our road.
Because
Yes.
if they're not paying the gas tax, then what are they paying and how does that work?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we were part of a press conference with the County Road Association a couple of weeks ago, where they unveiled their report and talked about that funding gap. So yeah, good mention there, Madeline, because that still has to be addressed, and she didn't do that. So
Yeah, you can't talk about fixing the damn roads without looking ahead at where that future funding might come from.
yeah, I mean, she did talk about going back a little bit to economic development and jobs, Steve, that you mentioned before. She did talk a lot about education. So education, all 4-year-olds, having preschool kind of paid for by the state. So that would be, a good segue for them into the school system and alleviate some financial burden on families. But she also talked about expanding the Michigan Reconnect program. So right now, for those that want to go to a community college, you can go if you're like 25 or older and have the state subsidize that. She wants to expand it to 21 and older. So that might help with some of those workforce issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, so I mean, all these things, of course, and this is not uncommon for the governor to present great ideas at a state of the state. That what is it always going to come down to, though? It's going to come down to the details and how these things actually work and are funded, which will be interesting to see. There wasn't obviously a lot of detail given, which is, like I said, not uncommon. But we look forward to seeing what those details are, and look forward to being part of that process on making sure our priorities are protected at the county level, while also making sure that the state and legislature work on their stuff.
Right. I mean, and they come up with all these great ideas, economic development, or great benefits for, the people who live in the state of Michigan. But a lot of times, and just drawing back to our priorities, a lot of times they say, okay, we're going to adopt this public policy that, is a good economic development tool for small businesses. Well, now we're still waiting on legislation that's actually going to appropriate our reimbursement for some of those losses. You look at the veterans property tax exemption, again, a great benefit to a great sector of our community. But again, the dollar falls on the local units of government. So I get it, 100% want to partner with the governor to move the state forward, but let's make sure that we're balancing out who's actually absorbing the losses in revenue and still having to provide services. We got to figure that out.
Yeah, you got to keep the county strong, community strong, if you want to advance economic development. There's no doubt about that. So, and hopefully they work side by side. Anything else that we missed that anyone wants to touch on?
I just want to say, we know the governor's budget presentation is going to be probably that second week of February. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about her priorities in that budget presentation. It tends to be a little bit more detail oriented than the State of the State address. So, everybody who's listening, please, tune back in. So when we cover, so what happened with the budget and their recommendations, we want to make sure you guys stay informed of that.
Well, thanks. Yeah, that's a good point, Deena. Thanks. Well, thanks everyone. A couple other things. I did hear some Go Greens, some ISO shout outs. I think there was a U of M shout out, and I'm fine with that.
It was begrudgingly, but yeah.
But it was in there. It was in there. And, a lot of Lions, a lot of building up of the Lions. A grit hat at the end, which was, hey, I think we've all got the Lions buzz. We almost made the playoffs, Hey, let's keep the momentum going here.
Joe Campbell's kind of cute. Just saying.
Oh, jeez. I'm sure he'll watch this now. And
yes, good. He's got a fan. I'm telling you.
All right. Well, hey, if no one else says anything else, thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning into our podcast. We'll look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.